What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Um, all right, this video, I want to talk about, this ongoing narrative against LeBron James. Okay, this narrative that he somehow was trying to give like a coded message to fellow black people as far as that police officer that shot the 16-year-old girl. Um, in I believe it was Columbus, Ohio, I think it was. When everybody knows what anybody with common sense knows what he meant because he referenced Derek Chauvin. He was talking about him being held accountable in the eyes of the law. But you know how it is, you know what I'm saying? Somehow, in some people's world, LeBron James posting a tweet that at best can be misinterpreted as somehow a call for arms, right? Is more egregious than an actual person who snuffed out a life on camera, but somehow it's justified because he has on a uniform, right? Well, I can make the same argument that we've had a lot of troops, right, that serve overseas who committed war crimes, who have raped and pillaged villages over in Vietnam or any of these third world countries. I could talk about how the fact that many of many victims of genocide were killed by men who wore suits and uniforms. So the uniform thing doesn't phase me to try to guilt you into somehow saying, "Oh, you're unpatriotic." It's bull crap, right? So I'm not gonna name names in this video because YouTube is YouTube. So I'm just gonna say this. So there's this narrative that LeBron James was offered to meet with this black police officer, sort of like a meeting of minds to come to some type of agreement about, or some type of to garner some type of communication. Look, um, first of all, the fact that this was a black police officer who wrote this open letter to LeBron James doesn't prove anything. Okay, as we all know, there are a lot of black people who hate other black people. I think we know this, right? So that doesn't impress me. Secondly, who is this cop to elicit a sit down with LeBron James? Who are you? Just because you're a cop that gives you some type of privilege? What about that black police officer that accidentally shot and killed that white woman in Minneapolis? I think it was. I know it was definitely Minnesota. Where was all of his where were his support at? Where were all these you know blue badge blue lives matter folk at then? Huh? No. What they did was make light of the fact that he was an immigrant, demonize him is what they do, and he, I believe, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for an accident, by the way. But somehow, some way, as usual, when we talk about how police officers shooting black citizens and having a predisposition to shooting and killing and using lethal force against black Americans, somehow when you point out this fact, you somehow become a racist yourself. For pointing out racial problems in this country, you become a racist. But see, they did the same thing not only to Malcolm X, but what they don't tell you is they did the same thing to Martin Luther King Jr. They made him out to be a racist, riling up the Negroes. See, they always have an issue with a powerful black man or a perceived powerful black man. They always are leery of that. See, the right fears LeBron James because of his status. See, he hasn't really been polarized. He hasn't been marginalized. Even though he speaks out politically and socially in some ways, he's not totally quote unquote radicalized. You know what I'm saying? He's not for instance, he's not Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, or not to say there's anything wrong with that, but he's not, him, or he's not Craig Hodges, or anybody like that, or even Colin Kaepernick. We're talking about LeBron James, okay? A world renowned athlete. Now, the thing that also gets me is one particular Fox News contributor, right, who was totally shown his true character and true colors lately, totally has flip flopped on the issues. Guy used to be a civil rights attorney. Now this guy running around just being a mouthpiece for WS, right? Um, he's talking about how those who point out that white police officers disproportionately kill black people, somehow that's a socialist talking point. That's a far extreme left talking point. Well, let me ask you something. Back in the 60s, right, who were some of the main prominent Americans who were speaking out against, atrocities committed against African Americans, especially in the South? You have Lyndon Johnson, right? You had uh, Frank Sinatra, Charleston Heston was another one. Uh, I know this name is going to surprise some people, but before the mid '60s, Richard Nixon. Before the Republican Party began to change ideology wise, Nixon was known as a civil rights leader in this country. As weird as that sounds, if we were to travel back to 1958, Nixon was seen as friendly to the black community. Now, all these individuals I named, right? Does any of them screen liberal? Nixon is now seen as a racist because of the tapes that we've heard. Charleston Heston was a darling of the far right and was president of the NRA, the National Rifle Association. Frank Sinatra was a conservative, and Lyndon Johnson was a segregationist. So I always have a problem when people try to associate you pointing out civil rights violations as somehow being a product of the left. Don't do that bullshit. That has nothing to do with left or right. This particular issue. We're talking about basic liberal. We're talking about basic civil liberties, which is the problem that you have certain police officers, not all of them, but too many of them, who love to assert their authority and power on black Americans and are itching to have a situation where they can shoot them. Another thing that bothers me is this growing consensus that somehow LeBron James doesn't have his own opinions, that he's only a token of the Democratic Party, that he's this, Forrest Gumpish type figure who just being used, by Biden and Kamala Harris and them, Hillary Clinton and them. Look, I don't agree with LeBron's politics, but at the end of the day, that's why we live in a free country. He can believe whatever the hell he want to believe. And at the end of the day, that should be separate from how I view him as a basketball player. And I find it interesting that the same people who always talk about how minorities are always hung about race and there should be content of character and all this stuff, right? I find it funny how they view LeBron James as Satan or as the devil. And I don't want to hear anything about, Boule or all these different groups or secret societies. All of them, from the elected politician that you voted for when I told you not to go and vote, entertainers that you go and watch their movies, okay? Some of these so-called, leaders of our communities, all of them are part of secret society. So don't just point out LeBron James and demonize him like he's the only one. But even if LeBron James, let's just take your argument and say that he took a blood oath for something, right? At the end of the day, he still is trying to do some good, okay? So I just find it funny how this guy who's never committed a crime that we know of, never has been proven to cheat on his wife, has been an excellent basketball player, has been an excellent ambassador to the game of basketball, even if the game itself sucks from most fans' perspective. Somehow he's evil incarnate, but their savior, I'm not going to say any names, multiple adulterer, divorced several times, has failed in businesses, failed in marriages, despite earning billions and billions of dollars in his life, has declared bankruptcy twice, I believe, has been accused of rape by several women, and has had to settle 6 different lawsuits out of court for being a creep. I'll put it like that. For being a creep. Read into that. For being a creep. So you're telling me what? And you're talking about someone who got a tweet that says you're next. Could have been a play on Goldberg, right? For all we know. You're more upset about that, but not about a guy whose rhetoric culminated in the quote grand insurrection of January 6, 2021, when thousands of protesters tried to off terminate members of Congress who are voting to certify the election of the administration that they just couldn't accept. You have no credibility. These people are scum. And when it comes to these type of issues, uh, I stand with LeBron James. There are going to be some people in this comment section who's going to tell on themselves, and they're going to counter with, you know, arguments that really don't make sense. Well, you got to blame LeBron James. Look, man, he's not what you think he is. Well, how do you know? What you a Flounders Wall? Like what are you going off of? Oh man, you're just a sheep. Oh man, you're just a sheep, man. You're just accepting the Kool-Aid. Yeah, all right. Me, all right. Whatever you got, whatever it is that you got to say to justify your hatred. All I know is this: I find it interesting that people have, as I say all the time, people have more hatred toward LeBron James right, than they do for Tom Brady. A guy, when he saw the writing on the wall with the Patriots that they were done, he bolted. The NBA gave him a gift with Gronk, gave him, made sure that he was on a team that was great defensively. And look, we all saw that game. I mean, the gifts that he got as far as calls were ridiculous. I don't even go into all that. But people want to complain about the bubble and this and that. But they saw what went on in that game, and they just have all these excuses for people like, Tom Brady and Luka Doncic and Jokic and anybody else who, in their brainwashed mind, can do no wrong. But LeBron James is evil incarnate. You know what I'm saying? But it's not gonna get through to some people, man. Some people are just brainwashed into thinking a certain type of way, and I have to come to grips with that. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's not going to be saved. Everybody's not going to be able to see the picture of what it is. Now I'm talking about from outside of basketball. Now, if you don't fuck with LeBron James from a basketball standpoint, that's cool. But when it comes to this, bigger than basketball, and you still, yeah, I have to look at you funny, man. I really do have to look at you kind of funny. You know, I don't know. But in the end, bosses only sit down with other bosses.